Voters are pretty clear that the economy is their top concern when thinking about the next president. But mostly on the campaign trail, the conversation centers around what happened in the past or is happening now, rather than the economic challenges a president will face next year and beyond. So we interviewed economists and policy experts across the ideological spectrum to come up with questions that illuminate not what the candidates want to talk about or even what polls tell us, but what the next president will actually face. The first question: the Trump tax cuts will expire at the end of 2025. Renewing them will cost trillions. Would you continue them or not? How would you pay for them if you continued them? Question number two: America's economy will have to manage some big forces: the rapid onset of artificial intelligence, the learning loss during COVID, and expensive global wars. Are there parts of the budget you would want to grow to position the American economy for the future? Question three: the federal debt is over $34 trillion. Is this a problem? If so, why? And what would you do to fix it? Number four: the Committee for a Responsible Budget says Medicare and Social Security could expire in the next decade. Got a fix for that condition? Finally, presidents cannot do much to affect the rise in prices in all forms, but they can reduce prices in some areas. Where exactly would you reduce prices, and how would you do it? Here to help us think about some of these questions is Jeff Stein. He's the White House economics reporter for The Washington Post. Jeff, we didn't even ask questions about trade and interfering with the Fed, but let's stick with what we've got now. We'll start with taxes. You've done reporting on conversations that the Trump team has had about how he would structure the tax code in a second term. What do we know about that and the current code?
So the way the Republicans structured the 2017 Trump tax cuts was very clever. They made, as you know, John, the tax cuts for corporations, for corporate America, permanent. And then they set a ticking time bomb under the tax cuts for individual taxpayers like you and me. And they had them expire in 2025. And so that artificially kept the price tag down of the overall tax cuts. But it means that there's going to be this huge question of what's going to happen with literally up to $6 trillion in expiring tax provisions in 2025. And so the question has become, what will happen to those provisions? I have had exclusive conversations with Trump advisors who say that whatever Trump is saying on the campaign trail, he wants to come back and cut the corporate rate again. Now, we're seeing the Trump campaign sort of understand that this is not necessarily the best political message. And so they are increasingly saying publicly that they are not about coming back and cutting the corporate rate. They already cut it from 35 to 21. They had previously indicated that they wanted to go to 15, and now they're backing off that for political reasons in part. But it's my reporting and my sense that whatever they're saying, Trump is still dug in on this idea that the corporate tax cuts were good and we should continue to push them further.
And so on the Biden front, how does the sitting president, to the extent we know, think about this mix of corporate taxes and individual taxes going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. The Biden campaign in 2020 said, we will not raise taxes on anyone earning under $400,000 a year. And if they were to really stick to that pledge, and this has proven quite difficult for some of the White House budget geeks who are trying to put these numbers together when they come out with their budgets every year, for them, this is a kind of a big problem because it means that they have to support the extension of a lot of the Trump tax cuts. As I said, the stuff that benefited middle-class people is going to expire in 2025. And that quite cleverly created a predicament for Democrats where they have the choice of saying, actually, there's a lot of the Trump tax cuts that we want to keep, which they don't want to say for political reasons. And the reality that if they let those provisions expire, Biden will effectively be presiding over a massive middle-class tax increase. The standard deduction was doubled under Trump, for instance. That would snap back to the way it was before. Benefits for working families, parents, those would expire. And so neither side has a claim to the truth here. Biden has been very squirrely on exactly what he would do with the Trump tax cuts. And, if he had an actual chance to deal with them in 2025, it'd be very interesting to see how he could maybe say these provisions that I'm extending are actually middle-class tax cuts now that I'm the one who's extending them.
Now to the question of earned benefits or entitlements, however you want to talk about them. Is there much conversation about that looming problem, which, of course, has been looming for a long time? How does the presidential field look in terms of answering those questions about the big drivers of federal debt?
Yeah, I'll break a little bit of news exclusive for CBS and John Dickerson. We've been hearing that the Biden administration, you may remember in 2016, Trump kind of disrupted the Republican Party by saying, really for the first time as a Republican candidate, that they would not touch Social Security and Medicare. And that took off the table a huge advantage that Democrats had traditionally relied on, that Mitt Romney was hammered on again and again by Barack Obama, for instance. And now what we're seeing is Democrats toying with this idea. I've heard that the White House is toying with this idea of running on expanding Social Security. And that is an attempt to sort of, it's not final, it's not decided that they will do that, but that would allow the White House to again contrast Trump's tax cuts for the rich and for corporations with Biden's approach to expanding Social Security for 60 million plus people who are on it. And that it could be an attempt to sort of steal that issue back for the Democrats in an important way.
And then very quickly, Jeff, at the end on inflation, presidents don't have a lot of, or certainly don't have the influence over inflation that people think. But are there ways in which these candidates are talking about getting at prices somewhere in the price mix?
Well, we know for sure that what Trump is talking about could make inflation a lot worse. I had a long story about this over the weekend. Trump has proposed trillions and trillions of dollars, I think it's $3 or $4 trillion, in new tariffs. People may remember the global trade war with China that started in 2018 under Trump. Trump is now talking about that as a massive success, despite lots of evidence that it raised prices for American consumers. And he wants to massively expand it in his second term. Similarly, Trump is talking about mass deportations of undocumented immigrants, millions and millions of immigrants, particularly those who are crucial to making sure that meat packing and other agricultural work gets done at low wages for agricultural producers and for what people see in the grocery store. If Trump goes through with those two plans, it could seriously lead to a reacceleration of prices and inflation. So we'll have to keep an eye on that.
Jeff Stein, White House economics reporter for The Washington Post. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Pleasure being on, John. Thanks again.